Hello, hey everyone, I'm Rachel. I'm currently a product designer at Taxfix, and tonight we're going to be talking about dirty user research, how to do research when you have no resources, no time, and wear 12 hats. Before we get started, could I get a raise of hands for people here who think user research is an important part of their process today? Cool, and if you could keep them up if you've done research in the past 6 months. Keep them up if you've led research in the past 3 months. Keep them up if you've led research in the past month. Keep them up if you've been in research in the past week. Awesome. Well, we got quite a few, so that's really cool to see. But also, there is a point that as designers, we understand user research is important, but we're still not doing it very often. And tonight we're going to talk about what those reasons are, what are those stumbling blocks, and how can we overcome it so we could be doing meaningful but also manageable user research constantly. So first, if you are totally new to user research, you have no idea what it is, you've never worked before, why does it matter? This isn't really the talk for you, and we're not going to get into the basics of it, mostly because I think there are so many great online tools and resources already out there about the basics of research. There's great online courses, there's great YouTube tutorials, and they're oftentimes put out by big agencies like IDEO and Frog and Adaptive Path, or big companies like Google and Facebook. The big challenge with these is that they are put out by big companies. And so the places that a lot of us go to learn about user research are places that have dedicated user researchers, they have dedicated budget, it's defined that it's part of your process, and they don't really talk about what do you do when you are the only designer at a startup, or what if you're a design student who doesn't have this kind of team to leverage. And so that's what we're going to talk about tonight, which is essentially to say that this will not be an inspiring talk. It's not going to be about doing the absolute best research. It's not about what to do when you have 20 people and 6 months to get this work done. It's going to be a very rational talk. I feel oftentimes when I come to meetups or when I see case studies online, as designers, we're always trying to put out our best work and we're trying to look shiny and new and like we're really great, but we've all come here tonight to learn. And so we're going to talk about the rational and realistic challenges we face and where we can cut corners so that user research can be a more persistent part of our process. So one other thing before we get started is that tonight when I'm talking about research, I'm talking about exploratory research. So if you're not sure about the difference, usability research you can think about as when you can put something in someone's hand and get feedback on it. So whether that's a pinup and crit, whether that's a prototype, whether it's a product you've already worked on, you're getting pretty direct feedback. Exploratory research is more when we're having loose conversations to learn about a new topic. So maybe your company is developing in a new country, or you want to understand a new feature set, or what kind of new solutions are out there. These are the kind of conversations that are super important to your process, but can also be really time-consuming because it's kind of unclear where to start and how it even ends. So the 3 reasons, there we go. The 3 reasons that user research is really hard to get into your process is often resources, time, and buy-in. And so we'll walk through each of these tonight and kind of talk about ways around these problems. So resources. What I mean by that is actually how do I get people in the room to conduct user research sessions with? So there are recruitment agencies, and a lot of the larger companies do use them. But if you're on a small team or you're your own designer, you don't have the budget for that kind of work. You don't want to be posting on Facebook every week asking, hey, does anyone have time to check out this design I'm working on? And even if you do want to do that, you're getting the same thoughts and feedback from your friends and network all the time. And we want to make sure we're getting diverse perspectives in here. So the first way to get around that is that you've got to be working with your customer support team. It doesn't matter if you're using intercom or you just have a hello at email. This is your direct connection to users. And I think oftentimes with user research, we talk about involving your PMs in research or doing research with engineers in your side. But customer support are the people in your team that have the strongest ear to the user. So it's really easy to say, hey, this area of the funnel I'm interested in. Can you tell me when people have a problem? Or these are the types of problems I even want to learn about. Can you send people my way? But if you're not working with your customer support team or you don't even have one set up yet, there are ways for you to get around the issue of using an agency. So there are digital tools like respondent and testing time that are actually recruitment tools. So on these, you can kind of set up your demographics, ask a couple questions. They'll bring you candidates, and then you can select who you want to do your study with. So this is really great because they do all of the heavy lifting for you, but this could be on the more expensive side because usually they have a price per candidate that you actually have a session with. A bit of a cheaper option are actual freelance networks. So websites like Fiverr or Upwork, these are places where short-term freelancers who are looking for hourly work go to kind of pitch themselves and post their options. So you can either go and cold email them or post up job offerings and have people respond to you. So this is great because you already have a group of people that are looking for hourly jobs and hourly work. But maybe what you're working on doesn't make sense for a freelancer. Maybe if you're working in fintech or insurances, you can't be talking to a freelancer because that's kind of a niche role in that. The third type is actually just to use social channels like you use to connect things every day. I mean, we've all used Facebook Marketplace to go buy a used bike or to go find an apartment, and there's no reason you can't be using Facebook, Tinder, Bumble BFF as ways to recruit user participants as well. You really just need to be direct and have a great pitch for why someone should get involved with your user research, which we'll talk about next. But you can use social channels and completely find a diverse group of candidates that's completely free. So when you are going on any of these channels, how are you actually getting people to subscribe to your study? So you've got to master the elevator pitch of user research. So just like any other elevator pitch, we got to keep it short, we have to keep it to the point, and we have to keep it engaging. So the things you really want to hit in this message is what is the value to the person signing up, aka are they getting money? Are they getting free access to your tool? Are they getting a free session of your time? How much effort is required on their end? And then something to kind of justify that this is a real company and not a scam, especially if you're posting on social media channels where people might not be so sure about you. So if you're posting this on social media, you could do it from your own personal Facebook profile, but also if your company has an official Facebook, that might help with some credibility as well. The thing that I would recommend to avoid is do not write a whole paragraph about this is who my company is, this is our latest round of funding, our CEOs are super experienced, these are all the topics we're going to cover in our user research. It's cool, but like we've learned in anything with research, onboarding experiences, copywriting, people don't like to read a lot. So the more content you jam in here, the more likely people are going to be to skip right over your post. And when it comes to all this stuff about your user research session, you're going to cover it all when they're in front of you. So don't worry about trying to fit it all in here. Then once you have your blurb, you've gotten their attention, you need to have some kind of way for them to sign up for the study. So I use Google Sheets, a quick little sign up just to get their contact info. When it comes to your sign up, again, this is not the interview yet. This is not your user research yet. It's just sign up. So we want to ask the bare minimum questions to understand if they're a qualified candidate for our study. But oftentimes, marketing or maybe your PM catches wind that a survey's getting out and they're like, ooh, actually, we're working on this new project and we want to hear about this kind of thing and what are our competitors doing, so can we add these other questions? And again, we want to keep this really short so that we could keep people engaged and get them to come through the door. So all these other questions are really great, but let's have that conversation in person, not on the survey. Now you've got your great survey out, you check back the results a week later, you have all these people who have signed up, and you're like, awesome, let's start scheduling candidates, let's bring them into the office, I've got stuff I want to hear. So I've seen a lot of designers really regret sending out this email we have on the right, which is just to chat them up, be super nice and friendly. Let's talk about doing research maybe this week or that week. What works for you? We're super flexible. It's really polite and it's really nice, but you're setting yourself up to become a secretary. You have a lot going on during the day. You have a lot of projects going on. You are not tied to your desk and you're not tied to email. So help yourself out and use tools like Calendly, which do scheduling for you. And if you're not familiar with Calendly, you hook it up to your work calendar, you designate these are the days or these are the time periods that I have available, and then people can sign up directly on your calendar without having to go through this email chain of back and forth to find an appropriate date. So now that we have reached out to all of our candidates, we've got 15 really interesting people lined up. We're super excited to talk to them. They're coming into the office this week. But at the same time, this week, I also have to get 3 new designs out the door. I still need to do design QA. I'm sitting in OKR meetings, and I just don't have time to be dealing with all of the other elements of user research. When you have to write an interview brief, it might feel like you're doing a master's thesis. When you do synthesis, it feels like that process itself might take 6 months. And then you have to put this all together in a really awesome presentation that's going to convince your company to change courses, and that in itself feels like it's an own company that you're building. So where are the areas within doing the user research that we could cut corners so that we could be doing this constantly? I personally don't really believe in interview briefs. And again, this is a talk about doing the bare minimum. So I think that they can be really great, and I think that they can help you mentally prepare for the talk, but I don't think that they're actually necessary when you're conducting the research session. And that's because the entire purpose of doing user research is to learn from someone else what they think and to have them guide the conversation. So when you walk in and you're all prepared with your 14-page document of bullet-pointed questions, and you sit there and you read question after question, what you're doing is you're really limiting your ability to have the conversation expand into new areas you haven't thought about. What I like to think about is really keeping it within 3 buckets. Tell me about the first time, tell me about a good time, tell me about a bad time, with whatever topic you're really talking about. And within each of those 3 categories, then you're going to drill down into your why, how, what, why, and that's where the details come. And that's when the new learnings really come. When you're doing your interview sessions, you're probably going to have a note taker in the room. And again, maybe this is your PM, maybe it's an engineer, maybe it's customer support or another designer. Bring people into the room, 1, because you need them to note take, but 2, because you want everyone in your company to be hearing the user voice. But note-taking is one of the things that will save so much time during synthesis and putting together these presentations after the fact. And it's really important that when you talk with your partner you're doing interviews with, you make it clear, I'm not asking you to take notes, I'm asking you to take a transcript. And you want really as close to word by word as possible of what the person is saying. Yes, it's great to have an audio recording and to do a video recording, but if you do 8 hours of interviews, realistically, you're not going to sit and then watch 8 hours of video right after. Oftentimes, I feel that people write an outline of what the interview is, or they say these are kind of the main topics we covered. And while that is important, all of the really meaningful, insightful content is coming in the details of those main topics. And we really need to hear exactly what the user was saying so that later on when we're scraping through to find patterns and to find similarities, that's where that detail is going to come in. So again, going back to all these great resources online, I think there's a lot of awesome examples about different ways you could do synthesis. There's different ways to involve multiple stakeholders. There's ways that you can look at your data in a whole new way. But because the interest of this talk is to talk about the most practical way to do synthesis, this is what me and my team at Taxfix has found works for us. As soon as we're done with our interview, we block the meeting room for an extra 15 minutes, and we sit down, and on Post-its, everyone in the room writes down the most meaningful things that they heard in that session. I think oftentimes people leave putting things onto Post-its and doing this kind of synthesis until the end when they've done all of their sessions. But then you have to review all the notes, you don't really remember who said what, and it takes a lot more time. So if you just kind of write down the high-level stuff now, you're going to be set up better for when you have the whole group come together at the end. Also, when we talk about meaningful, I also see a lot of times designers will put down every single line that they heard in the notes. And there's a reason why we have stuff on Post-its and we have stuff on notes. So this example, 3rd grade student likes math. Cool, that might be totally true based on what we heard in the interview, but is that really going to change the way that we design and the way that we think about our consumer? Do we really need to spend time grouping and talking about this and writing down every 3rd grade student who likes math and every 3rd grade student who doesn't? If you don't really think it's impactful or about an emotion or a hook, then it's probably something that you can leave in the notes and review only if it's necessary. So you've got all of your notes. Now that you're done with your sessions, I like to bring everyone in a room together, and this is when we start trying to understand what's going on. So this is that wiggly synthesis that feels like, okay, I see how IDEO does it and how McKinsey does it, and they have these really cool briefs and these really cool tools, but how am I gonna actually lead this session? I like to keep it really simple. We all go around in a circle and we read out every chunk of Post-its that we have, so that everyone is kind of aware of what the content is. And then we go through, and the first level of grouping is we do it just by main emotions. So these are the Post-its that have to do with confusion. These are the Post-its that have to do with fear, with excitement, with happiness. And then from there, we go and we do another round where we break it down into something more specific. So when it comes to how specific your insights should be, it's hard to know, is this too broad, is this too small? And the way that I kind of gut check myself is, an insight should be big enough that you could bring 3 designers into the room and you guys can all sketch for an hour, but small enough that it's actually specific to your company. So if you say the first time using the product is hard, yeah, you probably did hear that in your session, but that's probably the case for every product out there. If you also say the color red is scary, again, probably very true, but really could 4 designers work on that at the same time in a way that's really expanding the product, or is that just something that you need to fix on your own? So you want to kind of find that in-between space. So once you have these insights and everyone in the team is really aligned, you now need to put it into a presentation that you could share it with the company to build out alignment, to help you shape your OKRs, to help you shape the strategy and create a human-centered team. Creating a research deck is something that I personally hate more than creating a design portfolio when applying for jobs. I think they're the 2 things that every designer can commiserate on together. And the one hack I found for both is that I just have to invest in a strong template. So every time I switch jobs, I'm not starting from scratch in my portfolio, I'm just updating and adding the latest work. And every time I do research, I'm not starting from scratch, I'm just using the same template that our design team has developed together and just slotting in the latest insights. And so the template we use here at Taxfix, and this example might not make sense to you, but I wanted to use real examples that we have from our team, is we always have our intro slide. So what was the goal of the research study? What were the topics we covered? And then a summary. And if you can't read the summaries, things like how many interviews did we conduct? What were the demographics? Why did we decide to do user research right now? Who from the company was involved? Stuff like that, so that we remember a couple months later on. And then the rest of the deck, I just have insight slides. So always have some kind of graphic or image. Here we actually have a screen that we were talking about, but whether it's actually a still from one of the research sessions, those are always awesome to remind people that real people said these things, or if it's just a stock image that kind of illustrates it, it's nice to have that element. But then we always have 1 sentence insight, a couple sentences that explain it and share the validation, and that validation can be quotes, real user stories. We heard this from 7 out of 10 users, things that really show people this isn't my personal opinion, this really came from research. And then I like to add the how might we questions as a next step. So what are kind of questions we can ask ourselves in our next sketching session? Or what are some of the experiments that we're already thinking about launching coming up? When you do this and you just copy and paste over and over for those insights you decided as a team, it really becomes super quick and effective as a way to cover your research. And you might not have every single detail you learned in research here, but at the end of the day, it's a presentation. And the goal of any presentation is a talking point to kind of share a story with a team. It's not to actually go through every single note, so that's okay. So lastly, we have the whole issue of buy-in, which is that everyone says they want research, everyone says they want to be a human-centered team, but oftentimes we're sitting in prioritization sessions and we hear, okay, well, it's quicker for engineers if we just build this. So how are we actually going to get our PMs to listen? And how are we actually going to get our VP of product to take this to heart? And also, I just threw a lot of content at you. And even though I keep saying, it's really simple, it's really easy, it's really quick, I also just went through 16 or 17 steps. And I know that you guys are busy at work. So let's think about how we can wrap this up and really make it something that we could do day to day. I like to master the roadshow. And I don't know if I feel like sometimes that concept doesn't translate, but roadshow is kind of like, instead of waiting for people to come to you for the content, you take it to them. So what I see usually happen is after you're done with your research, You schedule your 1-hour meeting with all of your stakeholders and your PMs and your engineers, and for 45 minutes you present, you leave 15 minutes for questions, and everyone nods their head and tells you how great you are. And then you're like, great, we are now a human-centered company. Everyone loves design. My job is done. But what really happens is that everyone goes back to their desk and they check Slack and they check their email and they order lunch and they go back to the stuff that they were thinking about an hour ago. And it's not that they're trying to ignore research. It's just that just as you are busy as a designer, everyone else on your team is busy and has other shit going on as well. So what I like to do is don't have hour meetings, ask for 20 minutes of someone's time and say, hey, I just had this really cool research study I think you might be interested in. Can we sit down and have a coffee and can I show it to you? Or better yet, don't even tell them it's about user research and just say, hey, I feel really insecure about this presentation. Can I get your thoughts and feedback? Because then they really can't say no. And what that does is it creates a space for you guys to sit down one-on-one and really walk through the content. And when you put the pressure of someone of not being able to nod off in a meeting and you're actually just talking with them, they'll ask you questions and say, I don't really get this slide. Or actually, the data we've seen doesn't line up with that, so maybe we need to double check that. And then you can hear the concerns or maybe their frustrations with the research and have an active and dynamic conversation about it right then and there. And what's even better is at the end of it, you could say, what do you think your team could do about this? Or how can we work on these problems together? And so you're really putting someone in the pressure, but also you're putting the spotlight on them to say, let's make some action from this data, because now we both can't ignore it. We both know it's out there. And so I promised I would make it easy for you to do this, so I've put together the dirty research schedule for you. This will take you 3.5 days over 3 weeks to do user research. So there will not be an excuse anymore to say I didn't do research this week. Week 1 is all about recruitment. On Monday, you're going to spend an hour or two writing your blurb, making your survey, posting it as many places as you can think of. Let it run all week. Friday, come back and spend 15 minutes just sending out your Calendly link to a couple people that are interesting. Then you can come back week 2 and you're all ready to do research. When it comes to actually doing the research session, I think that is the #1 area you can't cut corners on. You really do need to spend at least an hour speaking with people, again, so that you could get really into the meaty, insightful content. But we are going to do our synthesis as we go, and you can speak to 8 participants over the course of 2 days, and it's really not that hard to block 2 days of your calendar. Week 3, you come back, and in 1 day, we're going to knock out synthesis and a deck, which might seem insane. But because we have really great notes and we did synthesis as we go and we have our template, it's actually really possible to time box yourself and just crank out this content. So the only thing left is really for you guys to try it out. And I think it's important to say, we're talking about dirty research. Again, this is not the optimal experience. It would be great if we had a 20-person team and if we had $20K in budget and if all of our PMs were listening to us. The goal of this is not to say this is the only way to do research, but user research is a process, and what we know from design processes is that they're iterative. And so I challenge you guys to try this out, do it for 1 or 2 sessions, and then you're going to say, hey, you know what? Synthesis actually needs to be an hour every time. I can't do it in 15 minutes. Or you know what? I'm not ready to create that summary deck right now. It needs a bit more time. And that's fine to adjust this and nudge it. But I think the challenge here is to experience what does it feel like to quickly move through research and to have myself focus on the high-level stuff and not to let this take over my life. Because also, at the end of the day, if you're doing research constantly, then there's less pressure to have a perfect research readout every time. Because if you miss something, you're just going to catch it the next time you do research. It's only when you're only doing research every 6 months that there's more pressure to encapsulate everything that matters in one time. So it's my challenge to you. You have the holiday season. When you get back, try it out. Try it once or twice. It's really not that bad, and it's really going to make your work a lot more interesting and meaningful. And that's what I got. Thanks.